Hi guys, this is a tutorial on how I make my arrows. These arrows are based off of a stress ball design. They are extremely durable, efficient, they're inexpensive and accessible. The heads are quite large, they're heavy, but they perform extremely well. I have great accuracy with these. They fly well in windy conditions. And they have an effective range of an average of 120 feet. I like to use Carbon Express brand arrows. In my opinion, they're the very best. A bit of an investment, but they're definitely worth it. My favorite brand under that brand are the Predators. This one is the Predator 6075. It has a spine weight of 500, and that means it's very lightweight. I have not tested my build on shafts that are much heavier than this, so I'm quite convinced that the effectiveness of this build, despite the heaviness of the head, does have something to do with the lightness of the shaft. So I would impress upon you the importance of using a light shaft if you're using this build. It's also worth noting that I do fletch my own arrows, and that I do so with 4 vanes in a right offset angle, which increases stability. Starting with the shaft, make sure that you get as long an arrow as you can. I would go for a 30-inch arrow, personally. I have gone with 31, but it requires that I make my cones a little longer. So 30 is a good one. If your arrow shafts come with any sort of insert, including flat points, target points, anything like that, you must remove them. And you can do that with pipe cutters, such as this little one here, or some larger ones here. Whatever you're using, and whatever you're cutting, but especially carbon, please make sure that you use gloves and that you have a plate or some sort of container, or do it outside. Just make sure you catch the little bits and slivers that will fall as you're cutting, because carbon splinters really suck. Grab some hockey tape or cloth tape, depending on where you're from. I get mine at Canadian Tire. I believe other hardware stores would have some as well. And start wrapping the very tip of the shaft with the tape. Building the space is extremely important for the safety, durability, and overall build of this arrow. It is tedious, but it must be done. I'm just going to flip it around. I do want to give you a heads up that later on in this video there will be loud tape noises. I do apologize for that. I am still very, very new at making videos and such, so I'm working with what I have at the moment. So you're building this to the width of a nickel. Please, please use a nickel, not a penny. Pennies are very brittle, they crack, bend. I have seen some split in half. They're very dangerous. A nickel will take a lot of abuse and hardly take any damage for it. Plus, pennies are kind of hard to come by these days in Canada. Check and see if I'm at the right width. I need a few more layers. That's good right there. I'm going to cut that. And I will secure my nickel by putting some tape on top. 2 strips in an X formation. And now I'll check the fit with my pool noodle, which is the next step. I use pool noodle that is at least 2.75 inches across. This particular piece is 3 inches, and that's okay. The 2.75 is a little hard to find. Usually you'll see 3 inches and then 2.5. 2.5 is too small. That is the minimum we are required to have, but once you compress it with torquing and tape and all these things, it will be too small. So go for something a little higher. With this build, you really don't have to worry about every single little bit of extra inches being a problem. I get these at Pioneer Pools all year round. If you don't have any such supplies around you, stock up during the summer. And if you're hesitant about using pool noodle for arrows, don't be. In this build, the pool noodle is very well protected. It does not take a lot of abuse. It is extremely durable. I never have issues with mine. Swords are another matter. Arrows are different. I use a segment of, in this case, 3 inches, which is actually a little too much. So I'm going to chop that down to 2.75. You will need to cut your noodle according to the length of your arrow to your shaft. So measure your shaft from nock, the end of your nock, to the very tip. If you have a 31-inch arrow, you need to make sure that your final product has a draw length. In other words, the head has to end. Oh, my bad. This one is 275. Okay, I was looking at it from the wrong angle. As I was saying, if your shaft is 31 inches, then make sure that you cut your segment so that you make up for the extra. According to the rules, you need a 1/2 inch after the tip of closed cell foam. We're going to cover that. And then you need 2 inches after that of foam. With the way I make mine, if my arrow is 30 inches, I will cut my cone to 2.75. If it's 31, I will do 250. And in the end, I make sure that I either put the tape far down enough to know how far I'm allowed to draw, or it just happens to end up nicely at that point. I'm sorry if that's not very clear. It will be made clear as we go along. The point is that in the end, you need to end up with 28 inches of draw. So tailor the size of your cone to that. That being said, I have my segment here. I'm going to insert the tip of my arrow in here, and it is far too loose. We don't want any sort of rattle. That's the best way to get your arrows made illegal. So you need to put more tape around that and make it so that when you put it in there, it doesn't shift around. That's very important. I would like to point out that there are many arrow builds out there. There's some people doing really cool stuff with 3D printing and molds and things like that. And that's awesome. I like to see the innovation. And if you have a build that you feel is superior to mine, I'm very happy for you and would love to hear about it. But I do like that this build is simple and quick and accessible and very efficient, very effective. Just a bit tedious to make sometimes. So let's see how that looks. That's pretty good. I'd like to put just a little bit more. I want to have a little bit of resistance. While I'm doing this, I also want to thank everyone who was so patient in waiting for this tutorial. I received many requests to do this, and really my major sticking point was that I never made a video I was happy with. But I'm at the point where I am deciding to just go with it. And I know I'll get better, and I'll learn a lot about the process. And if I have to remake this someday, I will. But in the meantime, it should be good enough. That's good right there. I had to put a little bit of pressure, so it's nice and stable. Flipping this around again. I'll be doing this flipping thing a lot. I'm trying to find an angle where I can show you what I'm doing, but also have an easy time doing it. Push your needle in, your noodle, not your needle. Push your noodle in and leave about 1/2 inch of space between the tip and the edge of the noodle. You don't have to do this, but I do it as extra security. I'll be plugging this with some closed cell foam after I'm done making the cone. The cone is probably the trickiest part of this. If you're entirely new to the process, please don't get frustrated if you find that your cones are not pretty or perfect. You have to make a few dozen arrows before you really get a hang of it. And that's fine. So get yourself a sharp utility knife. Another friendly warning, I cut towards myself. It's just how I'm used to doing it. If you can avoid doing that, please do. Slant your knife, so you're holding it at an angle, and insert it at an angle. I'm trying to show you here how exactly that angle is working. I don't know if you can tell, but it is slightly slanted, and I'm going to slip it into the noodle on an angle. Let's see if I lower it a little bit. There we go. And I'm just going to start to carve very slowly at an angle. I'm going to try to show you from different angles so you can see what I'm doing. It is very difficult, I'm sorry. I'm following the upper edge here. I'm leaving very little up top. And I'm leaving way more at the bottom. You can't really see it very well right now, but this is how I usually do it. This is what I mean by being a complete noob when it comes to these videos. Be very careful. My knife is very sharp, which is how it should be. This gives you a relatively smooth cone shape with a thin edge up here and a much thicker edge here. You can use your knife to kind of shave off a little bit here, make it a bit neater. you don't have to be too picky about it. And of course, doing this does require practice. My first few cones were absolutely horrible. Next up, we want to torque. Torquing is another thing that comes more naturally with a lot of practice. I use packing tape for this. And let's see how I can show you how this goes. If I can find my piece. There we go. Let me just move the camera a little bit. Table. With torquing, start by placing your tape at the upper edges of the cone. Smooth it down. Get a bit of a grip on the noodle. Keep your thumb on here. Pull your tape out and wrap it around. So keep a good hold on your cone here, but put a bit of a pull on your tape. So I'm pulling a little bit, but I'm also holding it down. Just a little. As I keep moving down, I'm going to pull the tape harder to make it tighter as I go down. My thumb gets closer to the cone as I pull tighter. You'll actually want to use quite a bit of force to do this. I'm pulling very tightly at this point. Be generous at the bottom. You want to make sure it's secure. And while you're doing this, watch your top here. Sometimes the noodle will shift, so make sure you still have your space here that you need. So now you've got a nice, secure cone. Grab a scrap of puzzle mat. The sort I use comes from Walmart. It is a thicker variety than what you'd find at, let's say, the dollar store. I believe it's a ½ inch. And I get these little bits, usually from the teeth. I just kind of carve a little piece out of that. This is another step that's not required per se, but I like the added safety of it. Okay, make sure it fits nicely in there. And throw some tape on top of that. And I lost my edge. I'll just grab a different bowl. Here we go. Like with the nickel, I'll just put 2 pieces in a plus shaped way top here. Be careful when you're folding tape over the edge. Don't bend your cone in, but make sure your tape is nice and snug. After this, use the pool noodle, which qualifies, I'm sorry, not the pool noodle, the puzzle mat. The puzzle mat as your minimum 1/2 inch closed cell, and carve circles out of that. You can take your noodle and trace the circle and cut on the inside. You'll end up with 2 discs. Grab some tape. I'm just cutting up some strips so they're ready to go. Which really I should have done ahead of time, but like I said, I'm doing these things on the fly now. Otherwise, I get way too self-conscious. And let's face it, this is not a glamorous process. I cut up 4 strips. I'll take my first, place it on top here, and secure it to the pool noodle, hopefully. And I'll lay it down fairly tightly to make sure that they are well secured and don't shift. But I am being careful not to warp the discs. By pulling too hard. Then go on to place your other circle in much the same way. Pulling it down fairly tight on the sides. We're almost done. Next up, you need a stress ball, gamma ball, more specifically half of one. I get mine at Dollar Tree. They are, I believe, 3 inches across. $2.75 actually, which is perfect. If you can find 2.50 or rather 2.5 inch ones, that's great, but these do just fine. Make sure you don't get the smiley face ones. These ones are way too small. So get one of these and chop it in half. And much like the circles that we just put on, grab some tape. And use it to affix the sphere, half sphere, to the top. So that you end up with this. Lastly, for a little bit more security, I'll put another layer of tape around the whole thing. Starting with the sphere up here, just at the edges. And I'm not torquing in this case, at least not until I get a little bit lower. But I am making sure to tape it rather snugly. And I'll stop about halfway down the cone. All you need now is a cover and a little bit more hockey tape. The easiest way to cover these arrows is to use a sock. You can just slide the sock on and tape the bottom and cut off the excess. I like to use broadcloth, which is a cheap cloth, rather a cheap cotton that you can get pretty much anywhere. I use orange, which is a nice bright color that I can more easily find when I shoot. And one ends up in the bush. And I'll show you the easy way to do it. My square here is about 12 inches by 12 inches. Just grab your square and drape it over the head of the arrow. Try to lay it flat. Work out the wrinkles as best you can. One of the reasons why I prefer to use broadcloth is that I use specialty arrows as an archer, so I need to write on them, and socks will bleed. The writing just doesn't stay on them very nicely. This is also more lightweight for all that matters. Grab an elastic. And just tie up the base. I didn't do it tightly enough, so I'm going to start that over. This is just to make it a little easier to tape the cloth on. If you have a bigger square, probably be simpler to do it. My square is just about as small as I would want it to be. I imagine you can also use a twist tie or something a little easier to put around. There you go. That should be good enough. I might still have to keep hold of it. I will, just in case. Oh, that's pretty good. Grab your hockey tape. As you can see, I like to start just under where my sphere is. I just like how it looks, and you can still identify the color. Keep in mind that only the strike legal portions of the arrow need to be cloth covered. And the strike legal portions are, of course, the tip. So I'm going to find the point where I'm going to start. Just tap down the hockey tape. And like when I was torquing, tack it down with one thumb, pull with the other, lay it down, keeping a firm grip on the arrow and pulling pretty tightly with this other hand. I'm going to go around twice, going down slightly with the second pass. You only need to cut it if you... Actually, I didn't need to cut it. I could have just removed the elastic off the other end. So. This is why I'm doing it without editing. So you learn from my mistakes. And then just cut off the excess fabric. You don't need that bulk under your tape. Continue taping. Some people like to use electrical tape, and that's fine. I find that it doesn't adhere quite as well to perhaps the tape that I'm using, so I do prefer hockey tape, but use whatever works for you. Hockey tape is fantastic, though, not hockey tape, sorry, electrical tape is fantastic for temporary covers. For instance, if in the rare occasion that you might want to go sniper, and you have a bunch of temporary covers that you want to put on your regular arrows, or one of your specialty arrows breaks, having those replacement covers is great. And electrical tape is easier to pull off. As you get down below, your tape will bubble a little bit. It's kind of harder to keep it nice and tight, and it's flat. So just flatten it up as you go. Take it easy. Go slow. Practice. You know, as all things, it will get better the more you do it. And just keep going. Make it nice and tight at the bottom. There you go, you have a nice aerodynamic cone. Measure to make sure that you aren't exceeding the draw length. Now this one is at 27, where my cloth, my hockey tape ends. So I can definitely unwrap this a little bit. And bring it up. So depending on where you land with your measurements, adjust your next ones to have a shorter cone, or longer if that's what you need. And you can carefully get rid of this tape here using your knife. Just be very careful, don't cut into the shaft. And just make sure that if you do remove this tape, that you've got enough under here to maintain the integrity of the head on the shaft. In other words, if the tightest hold you have with your tape is down here, you don't want to cut that off. So just adjust your heads accordingly. It's a little tricky, but you'll get there. I'm just being very careful not to dig into the shaft. Watch your fingers. Okay. Just to be sure that I don't have any issues with this, because I have cut some of the tape, I will add more hockey tape there. And I have lost a tiny little bit of draw length here, but that's okay. I'm not super picky when it comes to that. If we were talking about inches, then I would take this thing apart and redo it. But in this case, I'm not overly worried. It's very rare that I have to make 120-foot shots. As fun as they are, I try not to do them for safety's sake. It's extremely tight right here. And I feel good about that. If this is a specialty arrow, make sure that you write whatever it is across the top. And make sure to label your arrows as well. I know that some people like to write their names on the fletching. I don't. I find that it rubs off, and fletchings tend to come off and need to be replaced. So all I do is I take a little piece of white cloth tape. You can also use masking tape, whatever you like. Write my name on it, stick it on the shaft right above the fletchings, and then I put a little bit of clear tape on top to protect it. And there you have it. Field ready, very, very safe, durable, and very efficient and effective arrows. Thanks a lot. If you have any questions, please let me know. I hope this works for you.